Hi, my name is Soundarya and I'm the creator of Unshackled Club. Welcome to an edition in the Extraordinary Visa Library, where we bring in past recipients of O1, EB1, and EB2 NIW visas to understand their journey and demystify the process to help more talented immigrants like you get these visas. In this edition, we have Daniela Herrera. Daniela is originally from Argentina. She moved to the US in 2016 when her company brought her on through an L1 visa. When her L1 was about to expire a few years later, she began looking into alternatives. The motivation to switch visas heightened when she got laid off in 2023. However, within a few months, Dani managed to put together a very impressive application and got her O1 visa approved through an agent in 2023. She's a leader in the recruitment, talent ops, and diversity and inclusion space. So excited to have her here. Daniela Herrera, ladies and gentlemen. Let's dive in. So, Dani, I want to kick off with the question, what motivated you to pursue specifically the O1 visa? And I know that there was a layoff that happened, but is there something that happened before the layoff which made you start to look into the O1 already?
Yeah, so actually two things happened kind of simultaneously, I would say. So, as you may know, obviously the L1 visa is non-transferable and it also has like a very limited time, right? So I was approaching already like my final extension. Like I was out of extensions. I was, like I had no more time here in the United States. So about like I want to say like maybe 2 or 3 years ago, as I was in conversation with my previous company, we were trying to identify what opportunities I could look into so I didn't have to leave the country. So that's when the O1 conversation started. And that's actually when I started to build, the profile with getting press and speaking engagements and all of those things. So that's one thing. At the time, honestly, it was the only opportunity that I had because again I'm not in technology, so the H1B visa wasn't necessarily like the best path for me. At that time I didn't even know about some of the green card opportunities that I could have pursued, but that's a story for a different day. So I had that conversation with my employer, so that's when I learned about the O1. And then earlier this year, as I was getting ready, to submit all of my paperwork and start the process for the O1 visa, I unfortunately got laid off. And that's when the O1 again became like the only option that I had to actually be able to remain in the country. Luckily, I had already, like had the entire process almost done, and I had like all of the documentation and all of the supporting materials, and that's how and when I was able to apply for a visa in such a short time, because I already had all of the paperwork ready. The only thing that I needed at that time, well, only thing like very almost impossible things, find an immigration attorney that would take my case and work with me as an individual and not with the backing of a company, because again I was laid off, and then either find a new job opportunity in less than 60 days or find an agent. At that time, again, I didn't even know that the agent O1 visa was a possibility. That wasn't information that my previous employer had shared with me. It wasn't information that any of the 5 immigration attorneys that I consulted at that time shared with me either. So I'm very lucky and very privileged that I was actually able to find an attorney that guided me through all of the options that I had with the very limited time that I had as well. So, recapping and answering your question, why I decided to move forward with the O1 visa, honestly, it was pretty much like the only option that I had, even though I didn't even know that that was an option for me.
Yeah, I I guess in retrospect, you could say the layoff was a blessing in disguise. I'm sure it didn't feel that way when it happened.
Yeah, I think so. Like, of course, it's still very hard, and it was very hard at the time because, again, as many other immigrants know, having that very limited time, like that 60-day time limit, Is very limiting, and honestly it's almost impossible to do
Yeah.
everything that you need to do in only 60 days. But yeah, like looking back and having able to find an agent and having been able to apply for the visa that I have right now, it's giving me the opportunity to actually grow so much in my career, something that I couldn't do so much before because again, I was on a visa that was very limiting and very, like it didn't give me the opportunity to do many of the things that I wanted to do. So hopefully with
Mhm.
time I'll get to grow a little bit more.
Fantastic. And the O1 is not first of all, it's not a very popular visa like the H1B. And I realize that when people first read about the requirements, they generally tend to feel overwhelmed or feel that
Yeah.
this, I don't think I can do this. I'm curious, when was the first time you saw the requirements and did you feel that way?
I did. So the very first time that I saw the requirements again was about like 3 years ago, give or take, when I was having this conversation with my previous employer. And the conversation actually didn't go that well because they went like, okay, this is the only option that you have, but you actually have to have like awards and speaking engagements and all of those things. And again, that's exactly what I thought. Like this is not something that I can achieve easily, especially in my field at the time and still now. Like it's not that common to have awards. Maybe it's speaking engagement, yes, because I mean that's something that we do fairly often in my industry. But press, Mm, that's a completely different conversation. Again, at that time, I didn't even know how to start getting press. I didn't even know how to reach out to a PR agency or how to reach out to journalists to try to get my work out there. So I definitely went through that moment of okay, like maybe this is not something that I can do.
Hmm.
And that feeling lasted about like I want to say like it lasted a couple of days, maybe a little over like a couple of weeks, honestly. And
Right.
then I took it very seriously because again, like it was like the only option that I had. So I took it very seriously and I took it as a second job to
Right.
gather all of the documentation and supporting materials that I needed to be able to apply to an O1. But yes, I definitely went through that moment of like, okay, this is how do I even do this? Like without the support,
Hmm.
without the network, without knowing anyone in the press and media field.
Yeah, we're going to get into the press in depth in just a few minutes, but I'm curious, you mentioned a few times that was the only option. Was the H1B not an option for you at that point?
No, I mean, H1B has never been an option for me, and there are a couple of reasons for it. The very first reason is I don't have a college degree. I dropped out two times from college, so I don't have a college degree, which of course we know that
Hmm.
for an H1B visa it's like one of the main things that you need to have. So
Hmm.
that's one. The second thing, H1Bs for my industry, it's extremely complicated. Like yes, I had some experience working in tech because, like, a couple of years ago, when I was still doing recruiting, I was doing tech recruiting. So, if I had like all of the other qualifications, there was a very slim possibility that we could have applied for the H1B, but it wasn't like the main option for me. So
Got it.
H1B actually was never like an actual possibility for me.
Okay, gotcha. I mean, I thought it was because of the chances of not getting picked in the lottery, but I didn't know
Well,
about
that's
these
that
other
too,
reasons as
right? Like
well.
that's
But that
that's
as
that's
well.
something else. That is
Yeah.
that is something else, obviously, but not having a degree that clearly limited my
Got it.
options a lot.
Okay, fantastic. So you discovered the O1 3 years ago, um, and you've been slowly building your case since then. And then,
Yes.
like, just when the layoff happened, you had most of it ready to go, it sounds like.
Yeah.
I'm curious, let's talk about the O1 application. First, starting with the niche. Um, so were you working in talent ops back then? And what was your niche in
Yes.
the application?
Yeah, so my niche in the application was, of course, diversity and inclusion, and then we broke it down a little bit more. So one of my specifications is inclusive hiring and diversity recruiting. And I do have, of course, a lot of supporting materials that actually showcase that that's actually one of the main things that I do. But finding my niche was also one of those things that actually takes a little bit of time, right? Because I do so many things and I have like so many years of experience that actually finding like one thing was, it was tricky, it was challenging, but I was finally able to narrow it down to, inclusive hiring, diversity recruiting, and of course there are a couple of other things that go into that niche, but that's like the general information around it.
Interesting. Inclusive hiring. So I guess the top level is maybe business. One level
Yes.
below would be hiring. And then even there, you talked about how you can include being more inclusive and implement DEI in hiring
Exactly,
practices.
exactly. So I
Gotcha.
would say, like, yeah, like the top layer is business. Then the second layer, if you want, is like anything related to talent and human resources and talent operations. And then we have recruiting, and then we have inclusive hiring and diversity recruiting, which also matches to the last role that I had as well, because I was already doing diversity,
Hmm,
equity, and inclusion within talent acquisition. So I
gotcha.
already had like not only in terms of the role, but like some other things that I was doing on the side as well.
Fantastic. So your niche seems pretty clear. Now getting into the evidence. So your top three criteria were original contribution, awards, and press, correct?
Correct.
I'd love to dive, deep into each of these pillars specifically,
Yeah.
starting with original contribution. So, original contribution is generally one of the harder categories because essentially it means you have to have made an impact in your field as a whole,
Yeah.
something novel. So, your field is talent recruiting, specifically inclusive hiring. What did you submit as evidence?
So a lot actually. So my
I'm sure.
entire case, my entire case is close to 1,200 pages. And we had to
Oh my
narrow it
God.
down to we
Okay.
narrow it down to about like 800 pages. But
Hmm.
let's focus on original contribution. So I want to say like one of my main original contributions. I co-founded a volunteer-led organization that it's called Allies in Recruiting. And basically what we do is we help recruiters and HR professionals and anyone in talent become more intentionally inclusive in their practices, right? Which is exactly tied with my niche. And I was lucky enough, like don't ask me how this happened. I honestly don't really know, but I was lucky enough that this volunteer-led organization did actually very, very good during the first 2 years. And this actually um, the volunteer-led organization, like the very first, we opened it in 2020. And after 2 years, we were actually acquired between a million air quotes because there was no money involved by one of the largest organizations globally in diversity, equity, and inclusion in advertising. So that, of course, like was all over the press and it was like, something that it was easy to show, right? So that was one. Then I also had the privilege to join. Um, it is also volunteer led because, again, I do need to make this distinction because at that time I was still with the L1 visa. So all of the work that I was doing had to be volunteer led. So I was also privileged enough to be selected to join the NASA panel for D&I professionals. So
Hmm.
that's another thing that it's, like original contribution. And I have, all of the supporting materials around it. And then I had the opportunity to participate in a couple of, like studies and papers as well. So those were like, my main original contributions on top of, like press and all of those things that we are going to talk about in a couple of minutes.
Interesting. Okay, so The first one, I actually didn't know about the allies in recruiting and the fact that it was acquired. That
Yeah.
is fantastic. And it also just shows this point that I try to emphasize to people that original contribution, some people ask, how do I get that? And I realize the answer is just keep contributing to your field. That's the only way you can get it.
100%.
And you're a great
That's
example.
honestly, that's the only way to do it. And again, like I know that sometimes, and again, like if you were to ask me, like, how did you get acquired? Like honestly, it was just, like all of the planets aligned. We were doing like a lot of great job within the advertising industry. So it kind of happened naturally. Um, but what I usually like to stress whenever I talk to immigrants that are struggling with the situation is if I could do it, like someone with no connections and again in any of the PR media, whatever it was. And on top of that, I was already on a visa that was extremely limiting because again, I couldn't do anything outside of my role for profit. Honestly, anyone can do it, right? Like, because if you already know what your niche is, there are always ways to contribute to your field, like to do things that are way beyond your day-to-day job, if you may, between a million air quotes.
Absolutely. Very, very happy that you shared this because um, the starting point seems very daunting for a lot of people,
Yeah.
but it can be as simple as reaching out to a competition and volunteering to judge. I do have a question on the second point you shared. You said you were on the panel for NASA.
Yeah.
Is that for judging? It sounds more like you judged something.
No, no, it wasn't. So I don't know why they called it panel. That's the name that they give it, but it's basically like a cohort of diversity, equity, and inclusion professionals. And again, this is volunteer led. So basically, what they do is when NASA has an internal or external project that they're working on, and they want to make sure that that particular project or process or whatever it is inclusive and accessible and equitable, they tap into this panel of experts. So they do this in multiple ways. Like sometimes they just, like email the information and whomever is available is going to review it and it's going to give feedback on it. Or for those who are, like at that time I wasn't able to do this, but there were a couple of consultants that that could actually charge for their time. So NASA, like in this panel, what they would do is like they would consult like as actual consultants and they would get paid for their time. So basically what
Okay.
it is a cohort of diversity, equity, and inclusion professionals that would help a very specific department within NASA with some of
Mm.
the projects that they were just making sure that they were inclusive and equitable.
Okay, okay. That almost to me sounds like maybe critical role as well because you were playing kind of a critical role in this big organization. So, I guess you included this under original contribution specifically because of
Yes,
the
we
scale
we
of
did.
NASA, right?
Exactly. We did not
Um,
only because of the scale, but also because I mean it was volunteer led.
mm,
And it's very ad hoc. I mean, it's not that it's something that we do like every single day. Like we could go, months could by and we can actually get like anything from them. It really depends on what they're working on, what the urgency is, and what they have going on.
gotcha. Awesome. So for all of this, I'm assuming you submitted obviously press articles for the NGO nonprofit getting acquired. Um, Probably some letters. Did you get any letters from people substantiating that you've made an impact in the field?
Yes, I did. So as I had, as we were talking about before, like I had been working on this, like all of the supporting materials for a couple of years, like 2 or 3 years. I already had like, I don't want to lie, but I had like 20 reference letters. And then of course, what I did was with my attorney, we chose the ones that we really wanted to present, and we made sure that the content of the letter is actually like really supported all of the work that I did for the field itself and not only like the role that I had at my previous company. So I think that we ended up submitting, I think that maybe 6 letters out of the 20.
Gotcha. So we'll come to letters soon, but a quick question here is, 6 letters just for original contribution or overall, you mean?
No, in general.
Okay, in
But
general. Gotcha.
most of them were actually for, like my contributions to the field. Because again,
Wonderful.
as I had been laid off, like we really didn't want to, like put together a case that was like specifically tied to my previous company. So we wanted to make sure that, USCIS would see my contributions to the field in general.
Wonderful. Great. So original contribution, that that is that. Second would be awards. I know you
Hmm.
have many awards.
Yeah.
I'm curious, what was the first award you got? Like, where did you start?
So I would need to go back and take a look at which one was the first, but I think the first was actually one either for speaker of the year or mentor of the year. I really need to go back and take a look at the list because like actually 2021 and 2022 were I was, again, as I mentioned before, I was taking this very seriously as a second job. So I was applying to every single award out there. So 2021 and 2022 were high in the award season for me. But I think it was either mentor of the year or speaker of the year.
Interesting. And I'm also now I'm curious, like, how did you start with the awards? Which website did you go to start looking for awards?
So what I did, so a couple of things actually again happened kind of simultaneously. So one of the things that I did, I went to Google, as many of us do, and I started to do a little bit of research on awards and organizations that would potentially host like an award season for people in talent, HR, recruiting, and diversity and inclusion. So I created, like a list of all of those awards and I created, like reminders on my calendar just to be able to apply to all of those awards. So that's one of the things that I did. But the other thing that I did, and I know that we are going to talk about like speaking engagements later, like some of the organizations that I did speaking engagements for and with, they also host awards. Um, and I had the opportunity, as I had participated in their conferences and their events as a speaker, like I I was already, included in their awards
Mm.
situation. So like those two things happened at the same time. And I know that this actually happens in many other industries as well. I know that design has very similar organizations that if like if you participate as a speaker, they might consider you as well for awards. And I know that technology has those opportunities as well. Like one organization that I really like is Women Tech Global Network. And they do those two things. They do like actually speaking engagements and they do awards. So again, it really depends on one's niche and industry. But I started
Got
with
it.
Google, honestly.
I mean, way to go. Like it just shows that you don't need that much more. It's all at your fingertips in some ways. Um, when you started applying to these awards, I'm also curious, what kind of awards were these? Were these grants? Did you get money in these awards, or it's just a recognition in your field?
No, no, they were recognitions, and again, because I was on an L1 visa and I couldn't get like any money outside of my salary. I unfortunately couldn't apply to any awards that would have, like a monetary award. So those I actually had to stay clear from. For some, what I did, and I didn't get any of them. But what I used to do if I noticed that they would do, like a prize for whatever reason, like what I would do is I would reach out to the organizers and I would ask, like, hey, if assuming that I applied and assuming that I won, is there any opportunity for me to donate this money to somebody else or to do something with it? Like some organizations would have no problem with it and some organizations didn't. So for the organizations that were like, no, that's not something that we could do, I decided not to apply because that was going to be a problem for my previous visa.
That's a great idea for someone else listening as well. What was the most prestigious award that you got in the end? Because I know you got,
Uh,
how many awards did you get, first of all? I'm also curious now.
10.
10
10 so
awards
far.
in 2 years.
10 so
Oh
far.
my
10
God.
so far. I want to say that there are two that I actually hold like very dear to my heart. One of them is the 40 under 40 for the city of New York. 40 under 40 for Latinos in the city of New York. That's one that I hold like very, very dear to my heart. And there is another one that it's also for Latina professionals. Um, and that was from Alpha, which is the Association for Latino Professionals Association in the United States. So those are my two favorites, but I actually like them all.
Of course, that's and for the evidence part of the awards, I'm assuming you included obviously all the emails that that you got from these organizations that say that, hey, congrats, you got
Yes.
the award. Anything else besides that?
So some awards would actually, so it really depends, right? Like some awards are, you know, like a little bit more formal and they will actually send you like physical award. So in those cases, what I would submit was, you know, yes, all of the emails. If they had a website, because most of them do, with my picture and all of that information, I submitted that information as well. I would submit a picture of the actual award, like with my name and all of those things. And if I had like anything on my calendar related to that award, I would submit that as well. Because some of them, what they do is they do, you know, like the award ceremony, and they could do that either in person or virtually. So I would submit that too.
Fantastic. That's very, very helpful. And I guess that's the awards criteria. Now moving on to actually one last question on the awards criteria. When you went to your lawyer and said, here are the awards I have, did the lawyer say, okay, this seems great. This is enough for us to like satisfy this criteria?
Yeah, like they didn't have any questions about like the awards. They of course wanted to make sure that I had, you know, like all of the supporting materials to actually show that those awards were actually given to me and that I was the person mentioned on the website or the emails or all of those things.
Right.
But other than that, I mean, they were like super happy with the number of awards that I had.
Fantastic. Because you had 10. I mean,
Yeah.
that's a lot for anyone, I would say. Amazing. Now moving on to press, which I feel like
Yeah,
is your strongest criteria, given
it
that you didn't
is.
pay a single dollar to get any of the press you got. I know we did a masterclass in Unshackled as well on this, but I'd love for you to break down, first of all, how did you start the press journey?
Okay. So yeah, this is I want to say that this is probably like my strongest one in a good, and again it kind of goes back to what we were talking about before. Like when my previous company told me, okay, like the O1 is the only opportunity that you have, but as of now, like 3 years ago, your supporting materials aren't looking that great. You really need to start getting press and all of those things. Again, I took it very, very seriously. And I'm not exaggerating when I say that I took it as a second job. So the way that I started was actually creating free content on Medium, LinkedIn, and Teal Feed. So Teal Feed, if you're not familiar with it, is very similar to Medium. Like now that they're doing a couple of other things, but it's basically like the same thing. It's just like you create content and you post it in
So
there.
it's a teal, Teal feed,
It's TEAL Feed.
FEED feed.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Haven't heard
Yes.
of
And
it.
it's very
Okay.
similar to Medium, but now again, they're doing some other things. Like I think that you can schedule like meetings on it, but I haven't used that yet. So what I did, again, starting 3 years ago when I took it again very seriously, the very first thing that I did was um, taking a look at how I could take advantage of my LinkedIn network. Because again, like having a background in recruitment and talent, I had been using LinkedIn for like 15 years, but I've never used it, you know, like to get press and speaking engagements. So what I did, like I did three things. Like I analyzed what some of the largest content creators on the platform were doing. I compared that to what I was doing. Then I did, you know, a course on how to create like engagement content for LinkedIn, if you may, just because again, I was very familiar with the platform, but I didn't know how to use it as a content creator, if you may. And then again, I took it very seriously and I started posting content every single day. And when I mean posting content every single day, I mean, like creating valuable content. I was sharing information about diversity, equity, and inclusion. I was sharing processes and policies. I was sharing like my thoughts. And eventually, like about like 6 months later, um, I started to get, like questions on my DMs from journalists and editors and writers. Like, hey, we are writing, like we saw your post about X, Y, and Z. We are writing an article about it. Would you be open to answer a few questions? And that's actually how I started. And then of
Mm.
course I use those opportunities to, to keep talking on LinkedIn about like, hey, I was published on LinkedIn News. This is what happened. And it kind of, like it kind of became a cycle of I was being featured in press and I was using those opportunities to attract more opportunities. And then of course, like everything kind of blew up when I was published, like in Forbes and in Business Insider. So that those were like, like the main ones. And at the end of the day, those are the ones that USCIS really like to see as well. So it was very
Mm.
positive at the end.
Interesting. So it sounds like there was a lot of incoming requests from journalists. I'm also curious, did you reach out to journalists actively on LinkedIn?
I didn't reach out to journalists directly, but what I did, I started to follow a couple of journalists so I would see what they were writing about, the questions that they had, and I used that information to kind of inform the content that I was writing about as well. But I did not reach out to anyone. I didn't do any cold pitching, to be honest, because what happens, and I know that we covered this on the master class, but cold pitching for journalists is not that great. They don't really love it. And with reason, right? Like they have like multiple things that they're working on. They're collaborating with multiple sources. So like having someone that they don't really know, like reaching out out of nowhere about a topic that they don't even care about, it doesn't do any good. So no, I didn't do any cold pitching on LinkedIn.
This is such a, because generally people do cold pitching, and I'm also not an exception because I remember when we were doing the Unshackled book launch, I reached out to a ton of journalists, and quite a few people actually responded and they were interested. But you had something that I think a lot of people lack or just don't have is patience.
A
Patience
lot
to
of
just
patience.
create content for 6 months and wait for things to happen.
Yeah.
And did you like when you started, did you know this was going to happen and you had a clear vision, or you just kept going anyway?
Yeah, I had a clear vision. I didn't know it was going to happen, right? Like I was hoping it would happen, but I definitely didn't even know that I was going to get published like in the BBC or like Business Insider. Like that was completely out of my realm, to be completely honest. Like at the time I was hoping, like for smaller publications, like I was hoping for LinkedIn News or, like smaller publications that would need to have like content to showcase. I was not expecting
Got
like
it.
any of the big publications to reach out.
Amazing. I guess the advice to someone who's listening to this, who's also starting from scratch, is um, having some patience in the beginning to just create quality content. And what I
Yes.
like is you were also following journalists to see, are they saying anything that I could create content on? Any questions that's on their mind? But anything else that you did, which in hindsight you realize worked really well?
Yeah. So one of the things that I think worked really, really well for me, and I know again that we talked about it on the master class, but I my goal has never been and still isn't go viral because that's not how you get the press. Like for the type of supporting materials that we need, right? If we are trying to get press and accomplishments and awards just, out of vanity, yes, go wild. Like, try to get as viral as you potentially can. That's great. You might get some press features, like, I don't know, like in BuzzFeed, out of like the funny tweets or the funny, like LinkedIn post about like X, Y, and Z. But that's not what we need, right? So I took it very seriously on not hoping, or my goal has never been to go viral. Like, my goal has always been reach out the audience that can identify me as the expert of the type of work that I do. Reach out to, like the journalist or whomever is talking about this topic, but I'm not after, like the thousands of likes that are not going to get me the results that I want.
That's such a great point. I think in your masterclass, this was my biggest takeaway is that going viral and getting press are not an overlap. They can be, but they're
100%.
not necessarily. Um, Fantastic. So now kind of switching gears a little bit. We talked about the three criteria and press, I'm assuming by the end you probably had like 10 plus press evidences, right? Or more.
I had like about 300. I'm not gonna lie, because again, like the big ones,
Oh
yes,
my
like
God.
the BBC, like Business Insider, those, yes,
Got
I
it.
had like maybe 5 or 6, like one of the big ones. But counting like the smaller publications, and yeah, I had again like over it was a lot. And again, we had to trim it down a
Right, right.
lot. Yeah.
Fantastic. And something else I want to just make a note to like someone listening is take a PDF, like download the press
Oh,
article as
yes.
soon as it comes out, because people take down press articles on the website sometimes. So don't ever wait for the like do it a year later because it won't be there.
Yeah, and the other thing, if you happen to get something in the press, like especially in the bigger ones like Forbes or whatever it is, after a few days, like Google the article, because what happens is some other, like blogs or other websites, what they're going to do is they're going to take that particular article and they're going to replicate it, and you might find your article translated into a language that you don't speak, which is also very helpful if you're trying to apply for a visa, because it kind of like demonstrates that whatever it is that you're
Hmm,
talking about, like kind of, like
great idea.
supersedes the area that you're in. And it also shows that whatever it is that you're talking about, it's of importance to the field. So that adds up. Like one of the articles that
Yeah.
I did, I think it was the one for Forbes, like it kind of like it ended up like replicated in 20 other websites. And it's the same article, but it's different websites. So USCIS sees it individually.
Amazing. I didn't know that myself. I should probably go and do it for my own press articles that I have submitted. Um, Fantastic. So those are top three criteria. Moving on to the lawyer. It sounds like you had some bad experience with lawyers as well, like
Yeah.
lawyers who thought that you weren't ready for the O1 or that they didn't even tell you about the agent route. So let's talk about um, how did you decide on the final lawyer who filed your case? What was your, like, was it a gut feeling or more of a very rational decision that you made?
So I think it was a little bit of both. The very first thing that I noticed that was very, very different to all of the 5 lawyers that I talked to in the past was that she actually took the time to talk to me and listen to my situation, listen to my case, and review the information that I shared beforehand. Like, I hopped on the discovery call, and she already knew pretty much everything that was to know about me, without, of course, like reviewing the 1,000 pages that I had on my case. But
Mm,
she had reviewed like my LinkedIn page. She had read like some of the materials that I sent over, and that didn't happen with any of the attorneys that I talked to before I actually chose the one that I worked with at the end. Um, and this person was also the only person that mentioned the agent visa that I didn't even know about. This person was also the only person that was like, you know what, like you have a lot of qualifications for national interest waiver visa as well, which at the time we couldn't move forward with because again I had like the time constraint of the 60 days because I was just laid off. But in the half an hour of that discovery call, like she gave me so many options that no one gave me in 3 years.
Amazing.
Like, and I know that we
And
talked about it off top, like offline, but I had like one attorney that actually scammed me. Like they took my money and they never like got back to me. Like, so yes, it was night and day.
damn, uh, Tess Douglas, right? Tess Douglas was your final
Yes,
attorney.
yes.
And I mean, I know Tess because she publishes on LinkedIn. I've been following her work there, so I'm really glad that that worked out. And I'm curious. So, for the people who don't know what the agent route is, because I would suspect a lot of people listening to this right now don't even know what that means.
As I didn't
Can
know.
you can you describe what the agent route means versus the employer route and why you chose that?
Yeah, so the best way that I have to explain it is imagine an artist or like an actor or an actress. They have an agent, right? So basically what they do is they find jobs for them between a million air quotes, or if the actress is hired, this person like manages like the contracts and all of those things. So that is basically the same thing for me. So basically what I do is the agent visa gives me the opportunity and the possibility to do freelance and consultancy work. And I have like two different routes. Like I can consult through my agent. Like if my agent finds like any jobs that I could do, like I do it through them. Or if I find like, I don't know, like someone wants to hire me as a speaker or as a trainer, I can do that. And then like all of the paperwork goes routed through my agent. So it works like very similarly to the agent that a singer or I don't know, like someone
Amazing.
in the creative field has. um and the reason why I chose this, again, it was timing for me, because at the time there was no way that I was going to be able to find a full-time job in less than 60 days.
And I mean, it's brilliant because it now it's giving you so much freedom. And a lot of immigrants, the reason they even go for these visas is the freedom that it gives
Yeah.
them, especially the EB1. But I think what you've now done is you are now the inspiration for other people to look at the O1 agent, O1A agent specifically, because
Yes.
O1B for artists, agent route is very common. A lot of artists
Yes.
do that, but not a lot of people in engineering and product and ops like you do that. So, at the moment, are you working on multiple projects through this agent?
I am. So obviously, like December, like work, tends to slow down a little bit, especially in the field that I am. But yeah, I was working on a couple of different projects, and projects for me could mean, like a longer consultancy type of project. And it could be, like speaking engagements or training sessions or one-on-one coaching sessions with talent or immigrants. So I consider them projects. So yeah.
So, Dani, a question that I get a lot since we're on the agent topic is how do you find an agent? It sounds like a dream come true to get somebody with whom you can work on multiple projects, but how did you find your agent?
Yeah. So my answer might not be helpful for a lot of people. So basically, my agent is someone that I know. So is someone who actually has a company in the industry that I'm in. And this person wanted to hire me. Like this person had been wanted to hire me for a very, very long time. But unfortunately, we couldn't do that because again, it wasn't an L1 visa in the past. So when I went through the layoff and everything that happened earlier this year, I had a conversation with her and she was like, can I hire you? Because I've been wanting to do this for years now. Can we actually do it now? So that's how I found my agent. Again, I didn't go to an agent website. Like, I don't even know how that works. What I do know, and this is information that my attorney shared with me, is that actually anyone that you know can be an agent. They have to be ideally US citizens. And if they have a company, like, it's even better, right? Because I know that it sounds, as you said, like a dream come true. I know that it sounds easy, but it isn't actually. I mean, they have to sign obviously a lot of paper. Like, they're responsible for you and the work that you do. If they have a company, they do have to submit like a lot of documentation in terms of like taxes, and like it's a lot of information. And the other thing that we didn't actually touch on is, in order to apply for an O1 visa through an agent, you do have to submit an itinerary of all of the work that you are going to be doing for whatever it is, like how long you're going to be applying for this O1 visa. So again, I was privileged and lucky enough that this person has a company, so we already had like some work that we knew already that we were going to be doing together. And then of course I had some other people that wanted to hire me as well as a consultant or a speaker or whatever it was, so we were able to put together the itinerary like 3 years in advance. um
Mm,
that itinerary, I mean, it doesn't necessarily mean that that's the only work that you are going to be doing, but USCIS wants to see, obviously, that if they're going to give you a work visa, that you are going to be working, right? So,
absolutely.
there are a couple of things that we need to keep in mind for the agent visa. But if anyone is concerned about like how to find an agent, I would probably start chatting with people that you know.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm so glad you mentioned the itinerary part because with the O1A, it's not as important because
Right.
it's, you're employed. So whatever the employer has, you probably will be working on that for the next 3 years. But that's also a good point for founders. For example, I applied as a founder on an O1A. So I also had to submit a 3-year roadmap for the company that
Right.
showed what we're planning to do. Um, and I think the other point about the agent route is USCIS also looks for what is the agent getting out of this. So generally, I know that the immigrants maybe give like 10% of their commission, what they get to the agent. So did you and your agent have something like that arranged or no?
No, and again, like, everybody will have like a different arrangement with their agents. Like, I know that there are companies that, like, their business model is, like, be agents for immigrants. My arrangement is completely different because like this person wanted to have me as a consultant, right? So, and from their point of view, they're gaining more from having me as at their disposal than actually, like, charging me like 10% or whatever it is. Like, having me is bringing them more work.
So interesting. Okay, so it's not any monetary arrangement. Rather, you are a very well recognized Latina award-winning speaker, so they wanted to have you on their platform.
Right.
Um,
Exactly.
Amazing. I think it also goes back to saying like if you keep doing awesome things, people will want to have you under their umbrella. So thank you
A
so much for
hundred
this.
percent. Yeah.
One last question on the application part of this is letter of recommendations. So you
Yes.
mentioned earlier that you had 20 letters, you narrowed it down to 6 letters in the end. Um, what parameters were you looking for while approaching, like who to approach to get the letter?
So again, this is a project, if you may, that I started working on like 3 years ago when I started working on the O1. So I focused on reaching out to people who could actually really talk about the work that I do from a very honest and transparent point of view. Um, and then I broke it down in terms of, like, co-workers or managers that I had in the past, or people that I supervised, people that are within the same industry that I'm in, but weren't part of the company that I was working with at the time. And then people that had seen me work, but weren't necessarily, like, my managers or my clients. So I had a few letters of people that saw me, like speak. Um, and they believed that the work that I do was, like transformative and it was inspiring. So I had a couple of letters about that. I also had a couple of letters talking about like the work that I did and that I still do for allies and recruiting and, like being acquired and all of that. Um, but thinking about like the common thread, I really wanted to find people that would actually really talk about the work that I do from a very open and honest point of view, and that would, also be open to writing a very lengthy letter because those letters are very long. Um, so those are the main things that I look
Got it.
for.
Fantastic. So it's a combination of obviously some people who are experts, people
Yes.
who have watched you or observed your work, as well as have worked with you, and people who have the bandwidth to write good letters as well, can write strong
Yeah.
letters for you. Amazing. Okay, this is kind of it wraps up the visa part of the whole process, but I feel like a big part that immigrants go through, especially, is the emotional component of
Yeah.
navigating the whole journey. And I want to talk about that at least briefly. Um, what emotional like challenges did you face along the way, and what helped you cope through them?
Yeah. So I mean, I went like for me it was a roller coaster, especially after being laid off. Um, Prior to the laid off, I was fine. Like I was doing my thing. I was confident in the supporting materials that I was gathering because again, like I had a lot. Like I don't want to sound, like cocky or anything like that, but I had like a very strong case with the awards and the speaking engagements and all of those things. So I was very confident. I was like very stressed and anxious because you never know like what's gonna happen. Like
Yeah,
you never
absolutely.
really know if they're gonna like whatever it is that you have or not. But I was confident in the materials that I had and in the work that I was doing. Then of course I was laid off, so that was a roller coaster of feelings and emotions because again, like I had very limited time to get everything done. I didn't have a lawyer. I had to start like all over again. Like I had to find a lawyer. I had to do like everything in 60 days. I had to find a job in 60 days, which eventually ended up being an agent. But those 2 months were probably the most stressful and anxiety inducing months in my entire life. Um, I'm
Yeah.
not gonna minimize it. Like I and still am, like I'm still feeling the repercussions of what
Right.
happened, but I was diagnosed with depression, with anxiety. Like I had to start, like going on medications to manage my anxiety a little bit. Like it wasn't easy. I'm not gonna lie. But then of course, like everything went well. So I was, like relieved. But even today, like a couple of months after,
Mm.
I'm still battling with the anxiety that I went through.
Because I mean, I think it's humanly impossible for someone to understand what it, even for me, because I've never gone through the 60-day layoff period, to know that in 60 days, you have to not just, find another job, but have to leave the country and your entire life and family and
Yeah.
people and car and house, everything here. So do you focus on the logistics of it, or do you focus on the job or the emotional component?
Yeah,
It's
so I
insane.
I decided to focus on the operational part of it and the logistics part of it because again, that's also part of the work that I do. I've been doing operations for so long that I focused on whatever it was that I could control, right? Like I couldn't control time going by, right? But I could
Yeah.
focus on, like putting all of my papers together. Like I could focus on reaching out to a different lawyer like every single hour, trying to find someone that was open to working with me and all of those things. So that's what I decided to do. Um, and then I would remiss not to mention that I was extremely lucky and extremely privileged to find an agent like very quickly. Um, and again, having all of the case like almost ready to go. Like the part that actually took the longest was having Tess, my attorney, get very familiar with my case, because again, it was like thousands of pages. So reading through it and
Yeah,
deciding what we are going to present and what we are not going to present, and then like writing the case, that was actually the part that took the longest. um for someone like not in my position, usually that might take like 6 months, right? And I had to do it in 2.
absolutely. Thanks so much, Dani. I feel like the last question I always like to end with is, what would you have done differently if you had to go through the last several years again? What would you tell a younger Dani?
I and I know that this is tricky, because I mean it wasn't an option for me. Maybe it was, I don't know, but um I know that it might not be like something that everybody has access to, but I would have fought harder to actually find an attorney outside of the company that I was working with that actually had my best interest at heart. So I could start exploring whatever option it was for me, but sooner, with more time. So I didn't have to be like running and trying to do everything in 2 months. That's probably the one thing that I would say, like my younger self, and anyone that is going through this situation right now, or anyone that is currently on an L1 visa or on an H1B, considering an O1 for the future.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Dani. You're the first Latina immigrant O1A recipient on this library that we're building, and I couldn't have picked someone better than you. So
Oh, I'm
thank you
so
so
happy
much
that we
for what
did
you do.
this. Yeah. Yeah. I'm very, very happy.
Hi again. Thank you so much for watching that. If you're not part of the Unshackled community yet, check unshackled.club to join hundreds of extraordinary immigrants and get access to free consults with lawyers, weekly events and masterclasses, a resource hub, discussion forums, and most of all, a roadmap to reach your goal. Thank you.